All right, today's webinar is an update on the best practices for general surgery EPAs. This webinar is inclusive of all the updates we have as of August of 2024 from the American Board of Surgery, and it's designed to address all of the needs for general surgery in terms of meeting the American Board of Surgery EPA requirements. During this webinar, which is approximately an hour and a half long, we're going to focus on evaluation designs, understanding how the entire evaluation process for the EPAs works, the integration with the ACGME milestones, the whole data mapping and reporting process for the EPAs, as well as updating you on all the various communications that have been shared with us from the American Board of Surgery. A little background about the general surgery EPAs and the ABS's position on my evaluations and what we are currently doing. The ABS is aware of what my evaluations is providing. Our initial point of contact was Dr. John Mellinger. He has retired as of July of 2024, and currently we're working with Dr. Karen Brassel as the point of contact with the ABS for the EPA integration. They are fully aware of the services that we are providing. We're fully compliant with all the requirements of the ABS. We are one of 4 solutions that are available. None of the other residency management services are offering these services. The ABS has provided the simple tool. 2 of the universities have developed their own tools, and then my evaluations has also provided a tool which we're going to discuss during this webinar. In our most recent communications with Dr. Brassel, it was communicated to us the importance of having residents complete self-assessments. That's a very important part of this EPA integration process. They have not set specific standards yet in terms of how many EPAs should be submitted, but as of July of 2024, the ABS has unofficially communicated an expectation that residents should have approximately 500 EPA self-assessments and faculty assessments collected over the course of an entire 5-year period of training. This is as of the PGY1 group that started in July 1 of 2023. The ABS is generally agnostic about the EPA data that's collected. The ABS has communicated that they will provide a mechanism for uploading the data from my evaluations directly into the ABS for the 2028 reporting. We have already shared with them, and we continue to share with them, specific report types we've created as they're trying to develop their own EPA reporting structure, which they haven't finalized. But ultimately, the goal is that by 2028, they're going to have specific requirements for EPA submissions by the trainees. So what are EPAs? EPA stands for Entrustable Professional Activity. I want to contrast this for you between the concept of competencies and milestones. So competencies represent a very broad domain. It's foundational, things such as interpersonal communication skills or medical knowledge, while milestones on the other spectrum describe a progression along a pathway. So in terms of communicating the domain of interpersonal communication skills, we might have a smaller portion of that where we ask about how does the resident communicate with patients and families, and we'll describe a milestone progression where we say, well, initially as a PGY1, they can have basic communication, but we expect by the time they're a PGY4 or 5, they're able to have very complex conversations with patients and families. So that's a milestone progression. An EPA, on the other hand, is a directly observable performance of a task. I like to use the analogy of getting a driver's license is equivalent to an entrustable professional activity. It's observable. I can sit in the car and watch you drive, and I can say, you know the rules of the road. I can entrust you with a motor vehicle to drive that motor vehicle independently. So it's very important to understand that EPA is a directly observable task that the physician will not only perform, but we can also assess them to see how well they can perform it, and to say, well, they're at a point where they are competent, or they're proficient, or they're able to teach others. Now, this entire integration of EPAs, which has now started with general surgery, and we expect it to move on to orthopedic surgery and the other specialties, gives new opportunities for programs to be able to identify gaps in existing assessments, educate evaluators on ways to assess the residents, and improve the evaluator compliance, because we're now dealing with much smaller evaluations that are done immediately after a case log. So meaning immediately after a surgical case, the resident will complete a self-assessment, and then the faculty will evaluate them. So it allows for improved evaluator compliance, and it also gives you an opportunity to update your goals and objectives for each rotation to include that information as well. So the general surgery EPAs that are effective for July 1, 2023 include 18 specific EPAs. This list is probably familiar to most of you, and this list of EPAs is what we have standardized within my evaluations. Each one of these entrustments has 3 phases that has been described by the ABS. Generally, there is a non-operative or pre-operative phase of the EPA. Then there is the intra-operative portion of it, and then there is the post-operative portion of it. So each entrustment is divided into these 3 phases, and each phase is rated individually. So I want you to think of each one of these EPAs here, such as EPA abdominal wall hernia evaluation and management, to represent an EPA group. And within that one EPA group, there are actually 3 EPAs. One EPA is about, well, how do they do in regards to then preoperative portion? So before they do an abdominal wall hernia surgery, which is the intraoperative portion, how do they perform on the preoperative portion in terms of interacting with the patients? And they've described specific things that have to be done. And then to further distinguish that from the postoperative portion, which is after the surgery. So again, keep that idea in mind that we have these EPA groups, and within each EPA group, there are multiple EPAs. So together, the multiple EPAs create a family, which we call an EPA group. And each of these individual phases is rated separately on a 1 to 4 scale that's defined by the ABS. Now, how have we gone through to implement these general surgery EPAs into assessments? Well, we've created these specific evaluations that have the component about level of complexity. There is the EPA heading itself, such as EPA non-operative, preoperative phase of abdominal hernia wall evaluation. Excuse me. Just wanted to zoom in on that so that you could see this section. And so in the first part of it, there's the non-operative component of it. Then there are the expected behaviors, which can be selected. If they click on it, they'll get a PDF that lists almost an entire page of data from the ABS that we've created a custom form for, that describe all those expected behaviors for this phase and what the ABS considers within scope or out of scope. meaning when somebody is involved with abdominal wall hernia evaluation, these are the things that are included in that, and these are the things that are not included within that. Within my evaluations, we've also defined levels of readiness. And the level of readiness is essentially at each PGY level, what do we expect of the resident? And then below that EPA is the rating scale, again, defined by the ABS. The 4 phases that I mentioned to you are listed there. And optionally, the evaluator can click on expand details in order to review the individual curricular milestones that have been defined by the ABS. So all of that is integrated together. Now, you can see at the very top, the first question about on the evaluation is about the case complexity. How complex was the case compared to similar cases? And when we look at this on the mobile app, it's the same thing. So whether they're doing this on the mobile app or on the website, they'll have the same access to the same information. Of course, it looks different because the mobile app has different structure and different real estate space for displaying the evaluation. On the mobile app, when you go down to the first EPA heading, again, I'm just going to zoom in on this so that you could see it better. The first part of it has the EPA heading, the non-operative component. It has a listing of the expected behaviors, which they can click on, and they'll get this PDF that shows them what all the individual level expectations are. And then they have the rating scale, which is again on a 1 to 4 scale. And they're simply able to move with their fingers. They can just move across to whatever that individual score is. And again, they can expand to review the individual curricular milestones. So whether they're doing this on the website or they're doing it on the mobile app, they have exactly the same functionality available to them. So as you scroll down the evaluation, then the second part, so remember each EPA is actually broken down into 3 sections. So the next section is about the intraoperative phase, shows the level of readiness, shows the individual levels from 1 to 4. Now, one of the important concepts here also is the expectations. Remember that I told you that they can click on the link to see the expectations in a PDF. One of the functionalities that the ABS really wanted is for faculty, when they're first completing these evaluations, they need to become familiar with these expectations. So if you look at these, the ABS has defined very specific expectations that if you are a resident of level 1 for the intraoperative portion, these are the expected behaviors. And if you're at level 2, these are the expected behaviors. And of course, all the way up to level 4, these are the expected behaviors. So one of the things that the ABS was struggling with is, do we want to display all this information to them all the time? And the answer was no, because they'll eventually become familiar with it. So within my evaluations, the first 5 times your faculty go in to complete these evaluations, they're going to see these expected behaviors, and then subsequently those expected behaviors will be automatically hidden, and they can simply click on the expand details to review it or to have a reminder of it. And on the mobile app, it's again the same functionality where you have the second portion of the EPA for the intraoperative and the third portion for the postoperative listed. So if you look at these questions, you can see on a typical evaluation, there are essentially only 4 questions that the faculty has to answer. One is the level of complexity. Number 2 question is the preoperative portion of the EPA. Number 3 is the intraoperative portion of the EPA, and number 4 is the postoperative portion of the EPA. So idea here, it's a super easy evaluation for faculty to complete. And the last comparison here is at the very bottom of the evaluation. Of course, we can see the third EPAs listed with the same structure that we described, and then there's a comment field for them to write comments here as well. Now, one of the reasons we want to see the faculty use the mobile app is because of the dictation functionality. So you can see here on the mobile app, when I get to the comment section, when I tap my finger into the comment field, there's a microphone that comes up here, so I can just do a voice dictation. I can also click here on the microphone, and it will allow me just to simply dictate my comments. So this makes it super easy for a faculty. They don't have to use a keyboard or to type their thoughts. And this is kind of in line with how faculty currently do their notes anyway, in terms of dictating a lot of this information when they go out to close their surgical cases. So the other idea here is we want to encourage faculty to provide narrative feedback. As you're aware, My Evaluations does have a service called My Insights. And in My Insights, our system is able to take all the narrative feedbacks that are written on residents and put that together in order to give you summative feedback on how the resident is performing in a narrative fashion. So collecting comments is very important, and this is another factor for simplifying that process. Now, let's talk, now that we understand more about the structure of the actual evaluation form, let's talk about how the trainees are self-assessing themselves and how the faculty will be assessing them. Remember, based on the ABS requirements, trainee self-assessments are considered a critical component of this EPA program. It's not just about faculty assessing, but it's about trainee self-assessment. So there are really three options for assessing assessments. The first option, which is the one that I recommend that you implement as a standard, is the resident self-assessment. That means the resident will do a self-assessment and the system will automatically assign a dyad evaluation to the attending. And I'll review that in detail with you. So there's actually, the system has been set up already to do this for you. And I will describe those details so that you're fully familiar with it. But the entire concept there is that it's in the hands of the resident. The second option is attending self-assignments. The attending can simply go in and say, hey, I want to do an evaluation on this resident. Simple, straightforward, no bars hold. And of course, there's always the option for you to assign the evaluations to the faculty, but really, I don't recommend doing that. The first option is the way we want to go. So looking at these options, what I'm going to call option 1A, is the resident self-assesses themselves, and during the self-assessment process, the resident will be prompted to select the faculty that they worked with, and the system will automatically assign them the evaluation. So let's look at this for a second in actual practice. So here I am, I'm logged in as a resident into the system. I can go right here where it says submit and select voluntary evaluation. The other option I have here at the top, I can click on the menu option voluntary. When I go to voluntary, notice the very first option on the page is self-assessment. Notice that it defaults to today's date. It says that a rotation name is optional. And it says pick an evaluation. And look at this. I've got all my self-assessments ready there for me. So those self-assessments have already been set up in your individual general surgery programs. And those self-assessments are part of a dyad. Dyad means they're part of a pair. So consider the self-assessment as the primary evaluation, and the pair, the dyad, is the faculty evaluation. So let's say I just did a flexible GI endoscopy with a faculty. So I select that. It defaults to today's date. So all I had to do was simply pick that evaluation form and I click next. This will in turn allow me as the resident to do a self-evaluation on myself. So I come here, notice I'm going to review that entire structure with you here. It tells me that this is the EPA, this is the preoperative phase of the flexible GI endoscopy. It says review expected behaviors. When I click on this, it's going to open up a PDF, and there's the PDF with the flexible GI endoscopy non-operative levels of expectation. Great. So I can review that and say, oh, okay. So as a level 1, I'm expected to do this and this and this, and I can become more familiar with whatever those expected behaviors are. These are the things that are in scope. These are the things that are out of scope. Based on my PGY level, the system recognizes me as a PGY 4, and based on my PGY level, it says my level of readiness, the expectation, the benchmark for me is I should reach a level 3 by the 12th month of my PGY 4 year. Now, these are the 4 levels that we described. So I can say, well, I think I can do this procedure with indirect supervision. And I can expand on the details here in order to see each one of those individual behaviors we talked about. All those behaviors are listed here, the same behaviors that are on that PDF file. Then for the intraoperative portion, I can say, I also expect that I'm great here. For postoperative, I think I can do indirect, but notice there's also an option for did not observe. So maybe I was not involved in the postoperative portion, so I can always select not observed. And then here, there's an opportunity for me to write comments. Need to do more of these cases. Now, if I were on my mobile app, I could just click the microphone and dictate this. So at the very bottom, right next to the finish button, it says select the attending that will complete a feedback feed-forward assessment of you. So feedback feed-forward is the entire concept of these particular evaluations. So when I click here, there will be a comprehensive list of all the faculty in the department. I can select that faculty I did the procedure with, and I click finish. This will in turn assign that particular evaluation to that faculty. I'm finished with that evaluation that I wanted to do. There was another evaluation that was pending here for me. So if I were to log into the system now as that specific faculty, the one that the evaluation was just assigned to, that now on my mobile app as the faculty, I will have received a notification that I have an evaluation assigned. I would receive an email notification as well. And at the same time, I'm able to go in to complete that particular evaluation. So there is that flexible GI endoscopy dated for today. So I'm now able to go in and do evaluate in order to evaluate that particular evaluation. So I, as the attending, can now go through and say, well, this was a moderate or it was a straightforward case. And I'm going to say, well, his preoperative was a 3, his intraoperative was a 2, and his postoperative was good, performed well, but needs more practice. Did I provide direct feedback? Yes, click finish. And that's the entire process of this resident self-assessment dyad. So notice it's a very faculty hands-off process. So the faculty doesn't have to do anything. This can be done either through the mobile app or it can be done through the website. The other option is a resident requested of attending. So the resident, the same voluntary pathway, there's an option where they can actually request a faculty to do an evaluation on them. I don't recommend that option only because the ABS is encouraging residents to do self-assessments and is expecting that, but that option is available. And of course, the third option is for the faculty to do a voluntary evaluation. And the voluntary evaluation is very similar to the resident, where the faculty can go to the menu option voluntary and say, I want to evaluate the resident. And they can pick the particular evaluation that they want to do, pick the particular name of the resident they want to evaluate, click next, and that will automatically assign the evaluation to themselves so they can do a voluntary evaluation. And as I mentioned, there is a third option where you can assign the evaluations, but I don't recommend this. The first option, where the resident is doing the self-assessment, is absolutely the best option. Now that you understand what the form looks like and you understand how the process works, and of course, on this particular webinar, I've attached 3 handouts for you. There's a general surgery EPAs attending handout. This is something you can distribute to the faculty. There's a general surgery EPAs resident handout. This is something you can distribute to the residents. And the one that's just general surgery EPAs, that handout is for you as administrators. For those of you watching this webinar as a recording, these handouts are all available to you under the menu option My Help. These handouts are also available to your attendings and to your residents under their menu option, My Help. They have access to their own unique My Help list, and these items are available for them as well. So now let's tie all this information to the general surgery milestones. One of the important aspects of doing these assessments through My Evaluations is to have all the data integrated into your milestone reporting. So rather than you collecting this very valuable evaluation information in a third-party system that you really cannot use here, by using My Evaluations, you're getting all this evaluation data, and all this evaluation data is already automatically mapped to the general surgery 2.0 milestones. Our work was in part adopted from Dr. Mitchell at Bay Health's GME. This goes back approximately a year and a half ago. So our work is in part based on that. So here's a very basic table outlining examples of what the ABS had envisioned in terms of data mapping. So for example, in the first column, you're seeing the sub-competencies from the ACGME milestones. So the first sub-competency is PC1, patient evaluation and decision-making. It was determined by the ABS that this assessment has to do with collecting history and physical, that's H&P, and it has to do with consultation. And they determined that all of the EPAs should be mapped to PC1. So they have been. For PC2, which is intraoperative patient care, performance of procedures, they determined that this subcompetency deals with operative assessments, and their recommendation was to map that to specifically abdominal wall, hernia evaluation. So these are the specific different EPAs that they recommended for data mapping. So we followed this standard, and we have already mapped all of the 18 EPAs and their expected behaviors. They have already been mapped. That means as you're collecting your evaluation data, that data is automatically going to show up on your curricular assessment worksheet. When your CCC's meeting, they will see all that information automatically listed for them. So I'm not going to review each individual item. This table is just to illustrate that relationship for you between how the sub-competencies have been tied to the EPAs based on what rationale in the middle column, the assessment types. And this carries on down to practice-based learning, professionalism, and the interpersonal communication skills. So you can see in some cases, like PBL2, reflective practice and commitment to personal growth, only the GI EPA was considered to be related. So that's the only one that has been tied to PBL2, or soft tissue is the only one that's mapped to PR2. So please understand that we followed the same standards that were recommended by the American Board of Surgery, and we didn't reinvent the wheel. So we're really following those same guidelines. So I hope you'll take advantage of that data mapping already to maximize your the data that you're going to collect. So moving on from there, let's talk about how do you review EPA progress, and how do you monitor whether the trainee is progressing as expected. For this, we're going to turn to our first line, which is going to be the performance tab. So on your home screen, when you log directly into My Valuations, you'll notice you have the dashboard, you have performance, you have onboarding. This is something that is already available to you. Now, under this section, if you were to expand the specific tab on performance summary, you'll see that you have a section for competencies and milestones and a separate section for entrustable professional activities. Under the entrustable professional activities, you will see all the EPAs listed within your program. So let's take a quick look at that. Here I'm logged in as an administrator in the sample surgery program. I'm going to select the performance tab. Under the performance tab, I go to entrustable professional activities. Now it defaults to my particular profile. So because I'm an administrator, I can select Miranda Bailey, who's a PGY4 resident. I select Miranda Bailey, and then we're going to wait for this information to load, and we get a listing of EPAs here. So you kind of look at this and see, okay, there are a ton of EPAs listed here. All of you who are starting initially with this will see the EPAs are listed and it says no data. As time goes along, you'll start to collect data and you'll see that information. If I select the option with observations only, if you had a situation where there were EPAs that have observations, then only those would show up. The other ones would not show up. So keep in mind that Miranda Bailey is a PGY4 resident, so it's showing some data from PGY3 and PGY2 periods. So EPA performance for the current academic year, it's showing no scores are currently available and no observations, but overall the resident has observations. So if I go back and I change my academic year and I say, well, let's look at 2023. So in previous year, I would then be able to see the details of their performance over previous periods. So previous period information would be displayed for the resident as well. So this is where also I want to take an opportunity to make you familiar with the concept of EPA groups. So remember how I told you the EPA, for example, for abdominal wall hernia evaluation has 3 EPAs as a part of it. There is the pre-surgical, there's the surgical, and then there is the post-surgical component. So we call this here an EPA group. That's why it says EPA groups here. If I were to click on this particular EPA group, it would then show me the details. It will show me the non-operative component of the EPA group, and this graphical representation here, you can see the colors here representing what these different graphs are. I can hide all of these for a minute so I can see the user's score over time. I can click on observations. I can see the number of observations. So it's one thing to collect data on their score. It's another thing to look at the number of observations that they have available. Then I can say, well, what about their own self-score? So this resident doesn't have a self-score for this. Well, what about the group average? I don't have any group average. What about the level of readiness? This indicates where we expect residents to be at different training levels. And as I scroll down, I can then see the intraoperative portion, and I can see the post-operative portion all listed together. So this allows me to very quickly drill into EPAs. It allows the program director and the resident and preceptors to very clearly see the performance of a resident on all the EPAs and their observations. Now, in addition to that, there are a number of alerts that are available on the performance dashboard. You'll notice here within the EPA details here, there is a alert indicator, and the alert indicator says that there are no user scores for 3 of 3 EPAs, and there are no self scores for 3 of 3 EPAs. So for a specific period, this is when this resident was a PGY3, the system doesn't see any data for the resident. So these alerts are very helpful both for you administratively and for the resident. In total, there are 9 different sets of alerts that are displayed. In the blue here is the logic behind the alert. The orange color or the coral color represents the actual alert that's displayed to the resident or to the administrator. So if, for example, the user doesn't have any observations for EPAs, it'll tell you the user score for 3 of 3 EPAs, there are no user score. If there are no self-observations, it says there's no self-score. If the average user score is below the level of readiness, that's the benchmark where we expect them to be, it'll give you a warning that the user score is below the level of readiness for a certain number of EPAs. If the average score is below the personal target, you're able to set personal targets for residents. It will tell you that the user score is below the personal target. We have then some more logical tools to help you make improvements in the resident. Number 5 is based on the logic that if the absolute difference between the average self-score and the average user score is greater than 20% of the difference between the maximum score and the minimum score, then provide a warning. What does this mean? Well, the system says that the user score is plus 20% more above the user score in 1 of 3 EPAs. In other words, the faculty is rating the resident at a level 3. The resident is doing a self-assessment and rating themselves at a level 4. So in this case, the system is identifying that the resident is rating themselves higher than what the faculty is rating them on average. So this shows that you have a situation where they are overconfident in their rate, in their performance. It can also be 20% below, in which case the resident is underrating themselves. Number 6, number of self-observations is lower than 80% of user score observations. So you have a lot of faculty observations, but you don't have any user observations or too few of them. So it says there are too few self-observations compared to faculty observations for one of 3 EPAs. Number 7, it's based on the logic of the self-score or the user score. The user score is how the faculty rated, is below 90% of the scores from the most recent past academic year. So for example, last year, the resident was performing at a level 4, but this year, there has been a decrease below 90% level of last year. That means they've gone from a level 4 and now they're functioning at a level 3.5. So the system will say that there's a decline of 10% or more in user score compared to past performance for a certain number of EPAs. Number 8 talks about the absolute difference between an average user score given for an EPA and an average user score for all users, user score observations in that EPA is greater than 20% difference. So in other words, here we're seeing a score, the score is disproportionately low for some of the EPAs. So the user has generally been getting good scores, but now all of a sudden their scores are disproportionately low. Item number 9, which is the last item for alerts, is the number of observations for a given EPA in an EPA group is lower than 70% of the highest number of observations for the same metric along all remaining EPAs. So this is a situation where we're finding a disproportionately low self-observations for some of the EPAs. So we're looking to see, is the resident rating themselves disproportionately low compared to how the faculty is rating them. So this is just some basic analysis that's done by the system. Through the performance dashboard, you're also able to generate reports in a number of different formats. You can have them in both detailed and summary format, listing all the EPAs. You can also generate graphical reports showing their entire year-over-year performance. Additionally, you can access the menu option evaluations, and on the bottom right-hand side, access the curricular milestone EPA report. All of the general surgery EPAs are listed under the surgical skills competency. So once you select the surgical skills competencies, you will be able to run specific reports. In addition, for all of you under your menu option reports, we have provided 2 department favorites on reports for you to run, EPA completion history and EPA progress report that you can use as well. So let's take a quick look at that. I'm going to go under the menu option evaluations, scroll to the bottom right-hand side under the curricular milestone EPA report. Under this option, I'll be able to create specific reports on multiple users. So on the performance dashboard, I'm generating a report on a specific user. Here, I'm able to select more than one user. I'm able to identify, in step 2, it wants me to select a competency. Remember that everything is listed under the surgical skills competency, so we select that surgical skills competency. Then in step 3, I can either look at individual EPAs. Notice here it's the non-operative, the intraoperative, the post-operative components, or I can look at things based on EPA groups. So if I select abdominal wall hernia evaluation as an example, it's going to carry with it all 3 phases of that EPA. So instead of having to do one EPA at a time, I can just pick the EPA group, and that's why you see here it says EPA group. And then I have different options here. I can look at all performance levels, or I can look at residents that have marginal or less performance, or competent or better performance. I can focus on a specific academic year, or I can say look at all years. Once I select all years, it's going to give me yearly details. If I select a specific academic year, then I have a choice of running it as a yearly detail or as a monthly detail. All the EPAs will be normalized based on a normalization scale. For general surgery, we have set the normalization to be on a scale of 1 to 4. You can customize that normalization through your menu option evaluations under the EPA and normalization section. Otherwise, I recommend you leave it as a normalization based on 1 to 4. And then these parameters here are configured to give you the best results that exclude unnecessary detail about competencies and milestone criteria. You just don't need that when you're looking at these general EPA performance reports. So what we end up getting is a performance report that's going to show the details of this individual's performance over time. It includes both the EPA self-assessment as well as the EPA faculty assessment. Both sets of EPAs are included directly within the report. So here is essentially slides that review what we just went through. We went under the menu option evaluations, curricular and milestone report. We look at the curricular milestone EPA report. This allows you to review each resident's performance on each EPA over the course of all training years or month by month. So you can see in this particular report example, we're looking at their performance by PGY level in a graphical layout. You can also use the same report to look at the data monthly. So as I explained to you, you can do the monthly option, which will show month by month how their performance has improved over time. We've already looked at the hands-on component. I'd like to take any questions.